and the stranger asked, "This is a wandering boss, right?" Not much was said about them in the quest description. Regardless, it should be simple and he would finish it off in 10 minutes. At that moment, a swarm of skeletons gathered around the terrifying monster, which began to fight back, smashing one of them to pieces moments later. 2 more skeletons appeared in front of the monster, and the fight continued. It dispatched all its enemies with surprising speed. Just then, a masked man entered the battlefield and announced that he had missed everything. The hero was dumbfounded by what he saw and shouted, "Behind you!" At that moment, the ominous monster appeared right behind the protagonist and began attacking with its fists. The boy was stunned by what he saw and wondered what was happening. It turned out that Hunbok was protected by a magical hand that destroyed the enemy that had appeared out of thin air. It was the same dragon that had appeared to protect its master. At that moment, the protagonist approached the boy and informed him that this dragon was a skeleton. While it was still too weak compared to a true dragon, he should remember that it would definitely become stronger. At that moment, Nidhogg roared loudly and Hunbok told him to enjoy his meal. Nidhogg continued to restrain the terrifying monster, which moaned loudly. Hunbok approached the boy and noted that he could see Nidhogg needed help. Just as he did so, they would help each other. The boy looked at him in surprise and asked again, "What?" Hunbok said he was offering him a deal. What could he give in return? The guy shouted that he would give him anything he wanted. Hunbok replied, "What kind of nonsense is this?" He wasn't asking for much. His soul would be enough. After a while, the guys sat at a computer desk together, reviewing their offers. They had an ad selling spell cards targeted at everyone who had been deceived before. Counterfeit and low-quality cards were life-threatening. These cards were created using a unique original technology. The guarantee was that the card's effects had been verified by the site administration, so the sales began. They waited, and Christina noted that it was taking a while to work. Why had it taken months after all she had sent them instructions? Hunbok asked her not to be angry since they weren't as skilled as she was. They'd only recently encountered magic. At that moment, he remembered turning to the hero and telling him he would return his arm if he made a contract with him. He wasn't alone, and another hero asked, "Will he really return his arm?" The protagonist confirmed that it was possible. He admitted it was hard to believe, but said he would do it. The boy asked in surprise, "What?" Just then, Hunbok channeled his magic to restore the boy's arm. A magic circle formed, and the boy's arm began to heal piece by piece. Stunned, he stared at his trembling, restored limb and cried out in joy, "It's really possible!" The boy wondered who this man was. Hunbok, remembering his cover, introduced himself as Wanho. The boy repeated the name, surprised. Hunbok quickly changed the subject, asking, "So about that contract?" Instantly, a crowd of people raised their hands, shouting their agreement. That day, he made 21 soul contracts. He laid out 2 conditions. First, they had to keep his identity and powers a secret, and second, they had to give him their mana crystals during raids. He also gave them a guide to spell cards, arranging to receive a percentage from the sale of every single one. In short, he had completely capitalized on the situation. Castle remarked, "So now you'll be making money for doing nothing. Is that pure profit?" And Hunbok confirmed that it was, and Kai expressed surprise that he'd actually gone through with the contracts. Castle pointed out, "But I thought you said you didn't want to use your power like that." Hunbok agreed, but explained that things had changed. In order to protect himself, he had to bolster his defenses and evolve. Soul contracts are far more powerful than mana contracts, and he could create them at will. Besides, the confidentiality clause ensured that no one could connect all the contract holders back to him. Kai found this interesting, remarking it was like he was becoming an eminence in shadow. Hunbok stared at his friends, surprised, before blushing and shouting that they had it all wrong. Castle teased him, asking if he was just embarrassed because he'd been thinking the exact same thing. Hunbok told them to stop laughing just as a notification for a new quest appeared. Seeing it, he commented that a lot of time had passed, wondering aloud, "Will it really be any different this time?" Castle told him not to jinx it, just as the system announced the dungeon was level 1313. He'd cleared 2 dungeons almost single-handedly, but this was no time to get cocky. One wrong move, and this dungeon could easily take his life. There were 90 participants, and the time remaining was 500 days. The quest reward was 5,000,001 and 1 E-class item of his choice. Christina noted that even if this dungeon was different from the others, they could handle it. And if it was the same, they'd clear it even faster. A little later, Castle, decked out in his knight armor, started muttering about how bored he was. He couldn't take it anymore. "Where are all the monsters?" he complained. "We've been wandering for 30 minutes already. What's going on?" Hunbok tried to calm him down, but Castle just kept shouting about wanting to test out his new gear. Suddenly, Himbach went on alert, telling everyone to stop and prepare themselves. At this, Castle immediately spun around, a joyful look on his face. Finally, where are they, orcs, werewolves? Castle eagerly asked. Himbach replied grimly, no, they're other dungeon explorers, humans. Christina then asked, how far? He replied, there are 5 of them about a 19-minute walk away. One is carrying a crossbow and the others are armed as well. Kai asked, what should we do? Master, boo. Himbach responded, we'll watch them for now, but don't lower your guard. Be prepared for an attack. All communication goes through me, he added. Sometime later, the other party approached. Their leader stepped forward to introduce himself. He introduced himself as Jin Hyuk. Himbach returned the greeting using his alias. Jin Hyuk said it was a pleasure to meet him and asked if he was exploring alone. Himbach said yes, completely ignoring the armored knights standing right behind him. Surprised, Jin Hyuk gave him a questioning look and asked, then, what are those behind you? Himbach casually explained that they were his undead. I patched them up in the first dungeon and they've been with me ever since, he said. This explanation clearly surprised Jin Hyuk, who frowned in response. Jin Hyuk then asked, by the way, you look like a mage. How about joining our party? Himbach remained silent, so Jin Hyuk continued. Mages are always a great addition to a team. Knights and warriors are crucial too, which is probably why you have those skeletons with you. However, but who knows if there'll be enough in an E-class dungeon? As Himbach considered the offer, Jin Hyuk pressed, so what do you say, want to join us? Himbach agreed. Jin Hyuk clapped him on the shoulder with a grin, saying it was an excellent choice. Let's go, I'll introduce you to the rest of the team, Jin Hyuk said. Himbach thanked him while Castle could be heard muttering his disapproval. As the introductions were made, Castle muttered that he found Jin Hyuk to be a very unpleasant and suspicious person. A day later, a system notification showed that the number of dungeon participants had dropped to 74. Himbach realized with a grim expression that 16 people had already died in just one day. He noticed Castle approaching, asking him to check out their skills, as this was an entirely expected outcome. Himbach noted that, frankly, some of the researchers were completely useless, and he wondered how they'd even managed to survive before especially considering their enthusiasm. They hadn't even needed to step in. Christina remarked that she felt sorry for the people currently checking the quest information, especially those from the same clan as the deceased. At that moment, Castle smiled, snatched the card, and said that at least they had this, so they should get a move on. It was their new acquaintance's business card, and Christina asked again what they were going to do. Jin Hyuk was online right now. Himbach looked at his hands and asked when she'd managed to swipe his phone. Castle said they shouldn't just ignore him because if the remaining people formed a group, there would be a whole lot of them. Christina agreed with the idea. It was hard to argue with that logic. Kai said that, frankly, he didn't like this Jin Hyuk guy at all. Castle shouted that he was a great guy managing to get his opinion across, that he absolutely hated him. After saying that, he burst into loud laughter, and Himbach asked again what his problem with the guy was. Castle replied that he didn't like his face, his gaze, his attitude, and the way he talked. Absolutely everything about him was off. He was a shady character. Kai added that his clan didn't seem trustworthy either. He was constantly chatting with Jin Hyuk and probably didn't notice anything, but all his comrades seemed to be completely silent. And if you asked them about their feelings toward the clan and their leader, they only say good things. But their eyes told a different story. He could see hatred in them. At least that's how it seemed to him. Christina pointed out that it all sounded like nothing more than a gut feeling, not enough to jump to any conclusions. Kai said he couldn't ignore his intuition because sometimes hatred can spark from trivial things like someone eating the last cookie, but they had no proof. Castle turned to Christina and asked if she really trusted the guy. She replied, "No, I'd gladly get rid of him in a heartbeat." Her words alarmed the other guys, so she continued, "But I need to be sure first." She said this because she knew they shouldn't get involved with him. But looking at her phone, she noted that there was a reason they had to. Himbach asked again what that reason was. He listened to Christina and was floored. He had no choice but to agree with her. Now they definitely had to get rid of Jin Hyuk before it was too late. A notification from Jin popped up on his phone for all dungeon explorers. He greeted everyone and said he figured many had already looked up the quest information and knew that 16 people had died in a single day. By now, everyone should understand how different E-class dungeons are from F-class ones. He believes they need to team up and work together to reduce the number of potential casualties. He's also found a good place for them to gather. If they agree they should come to that location and discuss their next steps, they are all on the brink of death, so he strongly advised them to come. The meeting will take place in 3 days, and all the coordinates are listed below. They should message him if they can't find the place. Christina suggested that it seemed like they'd have a perfect opportunity soon. He just put this notice up on the website. She immediately showed the phone to the other guys who read it, and Himbach realized it would happen in just 3 days. Christina remarked that this was perfect and they still had time. They just needed to prepare well. At that moment, the main character noticed her expression and thought that she was acting just like her usual self. Now, because of her, he felt an intense desire to get this problem sorted out. Kel stated that they had no need for allies like that, and Kai added that they shouldn't make any more enemies either. 3 days later, Lord Jinhyuk's clan gathered around him right inside the dungeon. He stood in the center and asked if everyone could hear him. After that, he continued saying that it looked like everyone was here and he could begin. First, he thanked everyone for coming. He understood they had other things to do, so he would get straight to the point. He figured everyone had already gotten a taste of how different E-class dungeons are from F-class dungeons. They had already lost 16 people on the very first day. His squad was fully prepared for the monsters, but even they were shocked by the difficulty level. Fortunately, there were a lot of them, so no one was seriously injured. But the dungeon is a dangerous place. If you get distracted for even a few seconds, you can kiss your life goodbye. But that doesn't mean the dungeons are impossible to clear. There are plenty of threads on the dungeon website where people claim to have already cleared them. We're no worse than them, so what's stopping us from doing the same? Sure, each of us has completely different skills, but if we join forces, we'll have a good shot. Later, he'll tell them how to improve their skills, but they shouldn't get their hopes up too high. Their reality is a harsh one. They'll run into money issues since they only get paid for killing monsters. Splitting the income among so many people is bound to shrink everyone's take-home pay. And what happens if arguments break out? Things could easily spiral out of control, leading to a whole new power dynamic. So to get ahead of those kinds of problems, he wants to form a guild right now. Apparently, the dungeon website has info about an upcoming update to the guild system. It says that joining a guild boosts profits from monster kills by 30% on top of other benefits. Himbach realized Jinhyuk was finally revealing his true intentions. Jinhyuk went on explaining this was exactly why he was so insistent on creating a guild. He was nominating himself for Guildmaster, and at that moment his eyes flashed with an unmistakable look of superiority. The people around him started whispering to each other, but he continued saying that, of course, he had a good reason why he should be the Guildmaster. He had a superpower all thanks to his special talent. The crowd started murmuring, what kind of superpower is that from a talent is that for real? When someone asked what it was, he announced he had a B-class talent called Domination, which allows him to control anyone at a lower level than him. However, he admitted that he can't control those with a strong will of their own. It also doesn't work on people at a higher level. But he promised to work hard on developing this skill, and with his efforts, they could build a powerful clan. He'd be able to strengthen the skills of every single member. The crowd was stunned by this claim. He can enhance our skills, is that even possible? They wondered aloud. He replied that he calls his power a blessing for his subordinates because if they make a deal with him, he can boost their skills too. He figured it would be best to just show them. Can I get a volunteer up on stage? Just say you agree. At that, one of the guys raised his hand and said he was in. He walked onto the stage and stood next to Jinhyuk, who declared with a smirk that this man was now his subordinate. Jinhyuk offered to test his skills. He then used his magic, and instantly, the guy ranked up from a C-class to a B-class treasure hunter. The volunteer was ecstatic, shouting that he had actually gotten stronger. It was unbelievable. In just a few seconds, all of his skills had improved. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. Now they wouldn't have any trouble with the dungeons. Jinhyuk continued explaining that the further they progressed, the more their skills would improve, and that he declared is why he should be the guildmaster. Together, they could all improve and conquer this dungeon. Anyone who signed a contract with him would become stronger instantly. And that's why right then and there, he was ready to swear the mana oath. He thumped his chest to prove his conviction. The mana oath is an unbreakable vow. If a person breaks it, they don't just lose their mana, they die. Blue magical energy started radiating from his chest as Jinhyuk roared that he swears to never give the guild members useless quests. The crowd roared in approval. He even swore the mana oath. He's truly worthy of being our master. They all agreed to conquer this dungeon together. Jinhyuk thanked them for their support, thinking to himself, with a sinister smile, that he'd finally pulled it off. Just then, Himbach began to clap, saying it was a wonderful performance. He said he knew Jinhyuk wanted to create his own guild, but that this ability was truly something else. Jinhyuk thanked him, saying that receiving a compliment from a mage like him was a great honor. But then Himbok's tone turned threatening. "Could you answer a question for me?" he asked. Jin-hyuk replied that of course he could, as everyone around them held their breath. Himbok pointed out that his subordinates' skills were being strengthened. But that also applies to your influence over them, doesn't it? Jin-hyuk confirmed that it did, but added that they could resist if their level was higher or if they had a strong will. Himbok paused for a moment, repeating the phrase to himself before stating, "And that's precisely why those 16 people died, isn't it?" The crowd was stunned into silence. A shocked Jin-hyuk stammered, "What are you talking about? Do you really think I killed them?" Himbok told him to stop pretending. "They tried to resist," he said, "but they ultimately died because of your orders. Or is there someone else here with a similar power?" Jin-hyuk, furious and realizing he was cornered, began to scream with a mix of incredible anger and despair. "What are you talking about now? I didn't kill anyone. If you don't believe me, I can take the mana oath again. I did not kill the other dungeon explorers. I swear it's true." Hearing this, the people in the crowd frowned. They started to reconsider, thinking that the mana oath can't lie, so this wizard must have been mistaken. Castle was extremely annoyed, saying he wanted to just cut the guy's head off. Kai grabbed his shoulder, telling him to hold on because it would be over soon. Himbok then said, "All right, let me be more precise. You didn't kill them. He only ordered them to kill each other. All 16 explorers, that was his command." At that moment, Jin-hyuk gritted his teeth in anger, unsure how to defend himself. In the previous dungeon, Jin-hyuk was one of 28 explorers. He was no different from the others, but he did his best to stand out. He managed to gain superpowers and achieve his dream. But the problem is, he's a terrible person. By using mana oaths, he was able to force everyone into submission. But toward the end of the dungeon clear, he showed his true colors. People were ordered to kill one another. The explorers simply had no other choice. Technically, he hadn't killed anyone himself. He'd only given the orders. Jin-hyuk shouted that this was complete nonsense. The guy had no evidence. He was innocent. He was too scared to even show his face. Was he just trying to get famous at his expense? Hunbok replied that he did have evidence, although it would be hard to believe. Jin-hyuk trembled and laughed, saying that this was all ridiculous. He knew the guy had no proof, as the corpses had vanished with the dungeon and he had the survivors completely under his control. Just then, one of the girls under his control said that the boy should stop slandering him. They were only alive thanks to him, and he shouldn't make such baseless accusations. Another person said they were poor people and that he felt sorry for them, telling them to wait and that he would help them. At that moment, he cast a resurrection spell, and numerous figures rose from the dungeon floor. Hunbok revealed his new class and introduced himself as a necromancer. People wondered what that even meant. "What did a necromancer do?" Hunbok replied that they had heard him correctly. Mages with this specialization have a wide variety of uses. Summoning and resurrecting the dead, creating golems, and using poisons and curses, but he primarily specializes in the undead. That's why he can summon creatures that aren't so easy to come by. Honestly, he doesn't care what Jin-hyuk does, since it doesn't harm him in any way. But their spirits were constantly in his face and bothering him, so he had to intervene. Jin-hyuk screamed at him to stop talking nonsense. What kind of ghost was he even talking about? They're just an illusion, a trick of the light or something. Just then, one of the dead men spoke up, saying he'd had enough of this talk. He had to free him now. He had to free his brother. The people around him were stunned by what they'd heard, and the ghost of a little girl appeared before them in tears. She was trembling, and Jin-hyuk shouted not to believe them, saying it was absurd. They just wanted to become guild masters too, but they couldn't cut it. His subordinate quickly confirmed that this was true. Jin-hyuk hadn't done anything. They had to believe him. At that moment, the crowd grew even more stunned and angry. How could they let him come here and tell the truth? Was he planning to turn them into his puppets too? Jin-hyuk didn't know how to get out of this situation, as the people were shouting for him to free their friends, yelling that he would never become a guild master. Jin-hyuk's whole body was shaking with rage. He realized he had been so close to succeeding. But everything had been ruined because of this pest. He was just some punk who had ruined everything. With those words, he grabbed his sword and rushed forward, intent on killing Hunbok. But Hunbok looked confidently ahead and didn't even flinch. Protected by Castle, a brutal fight began that sent Jin-hyuk flying to the side. In rage, he shouted that Hunbok was an idiot, that they were just toys in his hands. Why was he interfering? Just then, Castle decided to pounce on his opponent. A frightened Jin-hyuk shouted at his subordinates to stop it. They obeyed the order. But suddenly Jin-hyuk shouted again and tried to defend himself, with his thin sword repeating the order to protect him. His subordinates started to move and also rushed forward. Castle knew he had to stop them because a massacre was inevitable. But Hunbok said they were innocent, forbidding him from killing them and asking him to try not to cause any harm. At that moment, Castle parried the attack of one of the girls, and Hunbak noted that they were too strong. Even he would have difficulty resisting them. Apparently, this was the essence of Jinhyuk's power. Jinhyuk began shouting loudly that Hunbak was stupid, that his skeletons couldn't handle his army. Just then, one of his subordinates was sent flying. That's when Christina intervened and used her magic seal. The controlled girl fell to the ground and Jinhyuk became enraged. He shouted that he was done with these games and that he would show them the full extent of his submission power. At that moment, he created a magical red circle that pierced the girl and she began coughing loudly, after which she screamed loudly, as did his other subordinates. This was Berserker mode. Their stats improve at the cost of their health points. Let's see you try to defeat them now. It seemed Hunbak would have to resort to murder after all. Just then, the thugs charged in, forcing Costella and Kai to defend themselves. Christina fired an ice arrow at one of them, but the girl just deflected the attack, protecting her friend. Janvok realized just how strong they were, but then he spotted Jinhyuk charging at him, yelling about taking all his toys and making them fight for him. Jinhyuk swung his sword trying to cut down our protagonist, who quickly realized he'd picked a fight with the wrong guy. Just then, Himbok unleashed Neat's magical hand, which snatched Jinhyuk right out of the air, making him choke. Jinhyuk was totally confused until he looked up and saw a massive bone dragon looming right over him. He screamed in terror as our hero summoned a skeleton army. They grabbed Jinhyuk's subordinate, and a quick chop to the neck knocked her out cold. Jinhyuk realized he was all alone. Himbok remarked that he was so close to winning, thinking that if he hadn't seen through Jinhyuk's plan, it might have actually worked. Jinhyuk screamed at him, "Don't you dare!" "What do you think you're doing?" Himbok closed in, raising his sword for the final blow, but Jinhyuk yelled, "Stop! I get it. You don't have to do this. Please spare me. It'll never happen again." "You're not a murderer, right?" But Himbok just asked, "Did you spare the people who begged you for mercy?" Jinhyuk yelled that he did, but our protagonist just paused and said, "You know, lying isn't very nice." And with that, he delivered a devastating final blow. His opponent's blood splattered across his mask. A little while later, Himbok was at home, hunched over the toilet and feeling incredibly sick. He was breaking out in a cold sweat, his stomach churning. He'd actually killed someone, and he couldn't get the thought out of his head. He'd crushed the guy's skull. The sight of the blood and brains haunted him. The smell, the sound, the image, it was all burned into his memory forever. Just then, Christina approached him saying, "You're a good person. You killed a bad man. If you hadn't, so many more people would have suffered. You did what you had to do." But Himbok asked, "Do you really think so? Maybe there was another way. Maybe I could have let him live." At that moment, a vision of Jinhyuk taunted him, and more importantly, they were my toys too. "So why were you against me?" Himbok had no answer because on some level, the ghost was right. Kasakai and Christina, they only followed him because he was their master. His companions asked, "Have you really forgotten? We're only like this because of your mana contract. If you hadn't killed Jinhyuk, he would have built a powerful guild and tons of people would have died, including us. It's not your fault. There was no other choice." Himbok cut them off. "That's enough. Don't say anything else. I want to be alone at least for today." An awkward silence fell over the group as they exchanged worried glances. Alone in his room, our protagonist just buried his face in his pillow. He was torn up inside. He knew it was the only way that they had to survive, but murder was still murder. He couldn't just forget it, and he never would. He made a promise to himself right then and there he wouldn't forget a single life he took. Even if it was for survival, he would carry the memory of each one. It was the only way he could even begin to atone for his sins. In that moment of resolution, a brilliant magical light erupted from his chest and back. The next morning, Himbok opened his eyes to find his friends cheering for him, congratulating him on reaching the fourth circle. He shot up in bed, confused. "What's going on? What are you guys talking about?" Christina beamed, explaining that he'd become a fourth circle mage. She told him they always believed in him and that he was an amazing person. A bewildered Himbok asked, "Wait, what does that mean?" They explained that his powerful resolve last night must have triggered a breakthrough, pushing him to the fourth circle. Himbok, still in disbelief, asked, "For real?" He grabbed his phone and pulled up the system window. Sure enough, it read level 41. He realized it was true. "So, I can get stronger by accepting my sins." He wasn't sure how he felt about that particular power-up method. But just then, Kai cheered, "Who cares, you got stronger and that's what matters." Kasa agreed, saying he should be proud of his resolve. Christina then took his hand, gently telling him not to think that was the only reason he became a fourth circle mage. "You were always going to advance as a mage. It was a completely natural progression." Himbok looked down, still a bit somber, and thanked her. Then he added that this new power would probably bring a whole new set of problems. Christina reassured him that it was okay. A lot had happened recently, and she suggested they all take a much-needed break. Our protagonist was surprised, remarking that a break sounded completely unlike her. She explained that the dungeons were mobbed right now anyway. After they took down Jinhook, the remaining players tried to form their own guild, but without a decent leader, it was a mess. They're all constantly accusing each other of being spies, she said. They're even trying to find you through the online message boards. Himbok just smirked and said, "Of course they are. After all, I handled the Jinhook problem so elegantly." A short time later, an article popped up online asking whether he was a savior or a killer. Many people had seen a wizard, a powerful necromancer who seemed like a hero to them. But recently, he had started killing other players. The guy was clearly a psychopath, obsessed with murder. They couldn't believe what they saw. It was terrifying. They all hoped they would never cross paths with him again. Mike brought it up with his boss, asking, "A necromancer with a skeletal dragon who's going to believe that?" Richard admitted he thought the same thing. But those dragons were incredibly strong, and even their own guild members would have a tough time taking them down. And this was all happening in an E-class dungeon. That's at least a Circle 6 monster, wouldn't you say? Mike agreed. Yeah, but my point is only an exceptionally talented and powerful necromancer could even handle one. Richard countered that a player like that could definitely exist. Mike, confused, pointed out that Richard just said he didn't believe it. He explained that there were just too many reports about the guy on the site. Too many people saw the exact same thing. Besides, he added, it's a given that Circle 5 and Circle 6 necromancers exist. Mike was floored by this, prompting Richard to ask why he was so surprised. The world is full of surprises after all. Mike acknowledged that was true, but he couldn't afford to get distracted from his own dungeon runs. He was just trying to do his job as best he could. Richard laughed and thanked him for his diligence. Mike decided to get back to it and gave a respectful bow. The director thanked him for his hard work. Later, Castle decided to get some training in right there in the apartment, and he and Kimbok started sparring. He complained to the protagonist that he couldn't just dodge forever. The protagonist, however, looked ahead, confidently tracking all of Castle's movements. He realized that after becoming a level 4 mage, his memory and speed had improved dramatically. He could now predict Castle's moves and actually keep up with him. He felt like a completely different person. In a flash, he dodged to the side, and Castle froze when he saw his own sword knocked away. He exclaimed, "Whoa, he's changed so much in just a couple of days." Kimbok added that Christina always said a mage's greatest weapon is their mind. Castle asked, confused, "His mind? Doesn't he need muscles?" Kai chimed in, explaining that you can't beat an opponent with brute force alone. Castle whirled on him and demanded, "What are you saying, I don't have a brain?" Kai shot back, "Of course not." That set Castle off. He got furious and yelled, "Get over here and we'll see who's stronger." The protagonist quickly stepped in, telling him he didn't mean anything by it, and to calm down, wrapping his arms around Castle to stop him from going after Kai. Then he yelled at Kai, "Why are you trying to provoke him?" Kai just stood up and announced that 13 more people had died in the dungeon. Everyone stared at him stunned. So those guys really did start a guild and even picked a name. That's one thing, but they were being way too hasty. They still need a leader after all. The protagonist yelled in disbelief, "What? But he wanted nothing to do with them." Castle agreed, pointing out that he was already a level 4 mage. He didn't need a bunch of pawns. He was way stronger than those weaklings. Kimbok said he was really eager to start clearing dungeons as quickly as possible. Just then, Christina appeared behind him and said with a terrifying tone, "No." She reminded him that as she'd already told him, he needed to focus on his skills. Even if he wanted to go, he needed to be patient for now. The protagonist was so scared of her that he literally backed away, stammering that he knew and didn't want to go. "But what are we supposed to do now? We're done with training, right?" "That's right," she replied, clapping her hands together. "It's time for us to come up with a new plan." Sometime later, the same girl who used to be Jinhook's subordinate was tossing and turning in her sleep, groaning in distress. She dreamed she was attacking an opponent and killing him, then screaming in terror as blood sprayed everywhere. She shot up in her bed, breathing heavily. Hana clutched her head, realizing she'd had that same nightmare again. But why Jinhook was dead? When Castle had knocked her out, she'd fallen to the floor and lost consciousness. Later, when she came to, the protagonist was apologizing to her for having to kill Jinhook. "But don't you worry," he said with a dark smile, "because this is where his real suffering begins." Hana's jaw dropped in shock. At that very moment, Jinhook started screaming, clutching his head and begging them to let him go. Kimbok just told him they could do whatever they wanted with him. Then the spirits of the dead swarmed him, all screaming for him to die, blaming him for their deaths. As Hana watched this unfold, she could only wonder what was happening. She looked down at her hands, realizing she could move again and that it was finally over. Just then, the spirit of her dead sister reached out to her, telling her that she was free now. That must have really hurt her, huh? But everything was going to be okay now. She burst into tears the moment she saw her sister and fell at her feet, sobbing out apologies. After all, her sister had died because of her. Her sister replied that everything was fine and that it wasn't her fault. She could hold on by herself, right? Just then, her sister smiled and told her to survive for the both of them. With those last words, she vanished into thin air. Hana screamed for her to wait, tears welling up in her eyes as the memory played out before her. She realized she couldn't just sit at home and cry. Clenching her fists, she vowed to become stronger so that nothing like this would ever happen again. From this day forward, she would be the one fighting monsters in the dungeon. She got right to it, charging the oncoming goblins and screaming that it was all over for them. A moment later, blood splattered as she completely wiped them out. Meanwhile, our protagonist turned to Christina, admitting he still didn't get why they needed a base. She explained that, as he probably knew, there are countless dungeons in this world and they couldn't possibly explore every single one, and if they happened to make a mistake during an exploration, the other explorers would just become nameless casualties and all the monsters would be free to pour into the real world right through their front doors. Himbok realized she had a point recalling his conversation with the taxi driver. People like him could also be killed by monsters. Christina added that they needed bases like these to increase the number of survivors. The base would serve as a safe haven for anyone in need. The protagonist agreed. Okay, so when do we start construction? Christina replied that they had another problem to deal with first. What else? He asked. Christina explained they needed a lot of money for construction, and unfortunately, the cards weren't selling very well right now. Hanbok was confused, but why we made sure they'd sell like hotcakes. Christina said that the quality of knockoffs was improving at a shocking rate. Who on earth is teaching people this? The protagonist clutched his head in frustration, asking if they should just double or even triple their production. Just then, Christina came up with the brilliant idea of selling magical artifacts. Stunned and nervous, the protagonist told her to hold on and asked her to repeat that. Was she serious? What if people figured out how to make them again? Christina told him not to worry. She only made cards for the money, and her real talent was wasted on them. But with artifacts, it was a completely different story. This time she would go all out. That was her final answer. She was brimming with confidence, leaving the guys stunned. She asked them again, "Do you really think anyone can even compare to me?" "That's brilliant," the protagonist shouted. He said they should get right to work and start raking in the profits, adding that she'd have him busy for a while and that he was sure to like it. Kimbok asked, bewildered, "Wait, I have to participate too?" She yelled, "Of course, and the sooner we start, the sooner we finish." Shaking with fear, the protagonist replied in a trembling voice that she was right. And so the next day, his lessons on creating magical artifacts began. Christina was a patient and skillful teacher, walking him through all the tricky parts and helping him with any questions he had. Thanks to her, he picked it up in no time. But she also punished him for the slightest mistake. The punishment was a magical potion, which, while good for the body, tasted absolutely foul. The drink was salty. Bitter, sweet, and spicy all at the same time. He felt like they had mixed blue cheese, spicy tofu, and candy together. This went on for 3 months. Finally exhausted, he crawled out of his room and declared that he had finished everything. Christina said he'd forgotten one more thing and presented him with another glass of that awful drink. The sight of it terrified him. He screamed at her to take it away, begging her to just kill him instead. With tears in his eyes, he started to run away when suddenly Kai appeared, informing his master that the time had come. The E-rank dungeon boss had spawned. The group of hunters gathered in the dungeon looking at their phones, which showed the time as 11:33. One of the guys was lamenting a failure, and another agreed that it would be tough for them without that person. Hana walked up to them and said they shouldn't wait for anyone, confident that they could handle it themselves. Full of confidence, she shouted for everyone to get ready because they were heading in soon. She rallied them, saying they could do it, and that they should move out. The crowd around her erupted in loud, confident cheers of excitement. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to the side as one of the guys yelled for everyone to look. Someone was coming. It was a horde of monsters led by Hanbok. A whole army of skeletons followed right behind them. The system announced that this was Dungeon 1313, an E-rank dungeon with 392 days remaining until the quest failed. Hinbok had started exploring this dungeon 108 days ago, and now the battle with the first floor boss was about to begin. Hinbok greeted everyone, saying it had been a while. They were all completely stunned as he cheerfully said he was glad to see them. They started whispering among themselves, wondering what was with all the skeletons and if he was their master. Hana replied that they were also glad to see him. She hadn't had a chance to introduce herself last time. She was Yun Hana, the guild master of the normal guild. She thanked Wano for helping free her sister and promised to repay the favor one day. Wano told her not to worry about it, explaining that his only goal was to expose Jinhik. With a smile, she said she understood completely and asked if he'd be willing to join forces with them to fight a monster for their mutual benefit. The protagonist asked, "So you're proposing a team-up?" She confirmed, saying you could call it that. She started to say that while he was strong, he couldn't do it alone, but before she could finish, Wano cut in, saying she seemed to have misunderstood something. He clarified that they were the ones who needed his help, not the other way around. She was completely dumbfounded. "Then, what about the reward for cooperating?" she asked. "A reward," Wano repeated. She opened a treasure chest, revealing 1,000,000 won in cash and 5 mana crystals, promising there'd be more after they won. The protagonist's guide, Christina, chimed in that while the mana crystals were very useful, 1,000,000 won was a pretty lowball offer. He then asked how they planned on splitting the reward. She explained that they'd split it among everyone. She and her 5 guild members were even ready to swear a mana oath to fulfill any request he had. He looked her straight in the eye and after a moment's thought agreed to cooperate not just for this fight, but in the future as well. Hana thanked him profusely and began to lay out their strategy. The plan was simple. The melee fighters would form a shield wall, while the ranged attackers would be their arrows. Since the boss was an unknown, she'd chosen a simple but effective strategy. Unfortunately, they had to throw that plan out the window almost immediately. The boss turned out to be a massive snarling werewolf, and it came with about 100 smaller werewolf minions. Hana was so horrified she was speechless, but Wano just told her not to worry, assuring her there was always a way. He gave her a reassuring smile. They quickly came up with a new plan, and after a few preparations, they entered the boss's chamber. They were immediately surrounded by countless monsters. The guild members muttered nervously that this was way scarier than they'd expected. As they cautiously approached the main werewolf, they were suddenly confronted by a whole mob of monster bears and bulls. The creatures let out a deafening roar and charged. Even the mice were monsters. Hana, leading from the front, yelled, "Shields up!" The tanks raised their shields just in time as she ordered the first and second squads to open fire. They launched a volley of liquid-filled vials, and to their surprise, the monster mice actually raised tiny shields of their own to block the attack. The third and fourth squads were up next, launching a barrage of fireballs. The projectiles shattered on the ground, erupting into a massive inferno that swept across the room. Roaring in fury, the monsters charged right through the flames, slowly closing the distance to their enemies. Hana shouted to Lord Wano, "That bull is all yours." "You got it," he replied, summoning his skeletons. He immediately cast the bone spear spell. A rain of bone spears showered the monsters. "Fire at will," Hana commanded the others. The monsters staggered back, roaring in pain. Was it really that easy? One of the guild members wondered aloud. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually clear the room. Just then, a giant axe came flying through the air and completely smashed their shield wall in a single blow. Hana's heart sank. These monsters were on a completely different level. "They're attacking again," the tanks yelled. "Everyone hold your ground," Hana commanded. "Don't move from your positions. Keep firing." More bone spears flew toward the monsters, but they just roared and batted them away with their weapons. A moment later, a fiery flash erupted right over the team. To their horror, they realized a monster had just used a corpse explosion. Screams of panic filled the air as their defensive line completely collapsed and monsters began pouring through. "Everyone fall back, run Akio." "Anyo, don't give up," Hana shouted, trying desperately to rally her crew. "It's 2-on-1, give it everything you've got," she yelled, but she knew it was hopeless. There was no way they could win like this. Maybe they should just surrender. What were they supposed to do? Amid the chaos, Wano shouted for everyone to retreat. Hana yelled back that his skeletons weren't enough to cover them. They'd be overwhelmed in seconds. "It's not over yet," Wano declared, unleashing his magic and summoning a massive wave of skeletons that completely surrounded the monsters. Hana could only stare in awe, wondering how on earth he had summoned so many skeletons at once. Just then, the great dragon Nidhogg materialized above their heads, and Wano cast a dark breath spell. A moment later, Nidhogg dove down on the remaining monsters, letting out a terrifying shriek as it obliterated them one by one with its powerful magic. Hana cried out in alarm. The boss, along with all of its subordinates, had vanished without a trace. She was trembling from head to toe, completely unable to process what had just happened. After the bone dragon's attack, Hannah cried out that it had vanished without a trace and anxiously asked if Hebok was all right. He stumbled, barely keeping his balance, and confirmed he was okay, but warned her it wasn't over yet. Just then, another horde of monsters poured out from the wall of smoke, immediately charging them. Hannah yelled for everyone to group up and prepare for the next wave. A squad of archers began letting arrows fly at the incoming rats. At that moment, the minotaurs charged the shield bearers, who braced themselves to hold the line. One of them cried out in horror, "What kind of insane power is this?" Just then, the protagonist's skeletons lunged at the minotaurs. He told her he would handle the bulls if she could take care of the giant rats. Hannah exclaimed with concern that he'd burned through his mana too quickly. Suddenly, a werewolf appeared behind him, ready to strike, but his skeletons materialized in a flash to intercept it. Our hero used his lightning strike skill, blasting the werewolf away. The monster furiously scrambled to its feet, its wounds healing instantly. He noted that their regeneration was insanely fast, but that didn't mean they were unbeatable. The protagonist then realized that his corrupted breath skill had used Nidhogg's mana, not his own. This gave him an opening to lure the werewolf in by pretending his mana was running low. He shouted, "Kai Castle, finish it off." At his command, the skeletons rushed into battle. The werewolf tried to counterattack, but they skillfully feinted and dodged, landing a flurry of blows. Castle landed a solid hit with his sword, but the werewolf took the blow, regenerating in an instant before shoving him back. He couldn't believe how fast it had recovered. Meanwhile, Kai circled around to the beast's back, planning to go for the neck. The plan was for Castle to keep it busy, giving Kai the opening he needed for a clean strike. He launched a series of attacks to keep its attention, but the werewolf healed every wound with ease. Castle yelled, "Get back and stay out of the way." He moved in for the finishing blow, but the monster sharply dodged at the last second and sprinted toward Christina. "Leave this one to me," she said coolly. A skeleton immediately used a chain skill, shackling the monster in place. Castle leaped into the air, swinging his sword down as he shouted, "That's enough roaring! The execution is about to begin." He brought his sword down with tremendous force and cleanly severed its head, the werewolf's body collapsing to the ground. After the monster died, a mana crystal appeared on the ground. The protagonist picked it up, and Christina identified it as a mana crystal containing the power of the moon. She explained that it was an extremely valuable item that could be very useful down the line. Meanwhile, Hannah bashed a minotaur aside with her shield and finished it off, then directed her troops to focus on the werewolves and maintain their defense. They had to stop the monsters and not let a single one escape. Kai charged into the crowd of rats and wiped them out in an instant. The protagonist walked over and complimented him on a job well done. The floor was finally cleared, and he turned to the adventurers and congratulated them on their victory. The adventurers looked around in shock, one asking, Did we actually win? We're alive. We completed the dungeon floor." Seeing her warriors so happy, Hannah was moved to tears. She told the protagonist it was all thanks to him. If it weren't for him, they never would have succeeded. She bowed her head deeply and thanked him. Our hero simply replied that he had just fulfilled his part of their agreement. The young woman asked what he planned to do next. He explained that he might team up with people as needed, but for the most part, he would go his own way. He wished them well, then turned and began to leave. Hannah called after him, letting him know they were heading to the second floor in 3 days, and that he was welcome to join. The protagonist replied that he'd think about it. A system window then appeared, announcing that they had completed the first floor of the Class E dungeon 1313 on day 108 and defeated the boss. Afterward, one of the adventurers approached his leader, remarking that their helper was even stronger than they thought. With a skeletal dragon and those undead warriors that fought the werewolves, he was on a whole other level. Another guy smiled and said that he wished they could continue exploring the dungeon with him. If Jinhyuk were still alive, someone muttered, he and this Hyanbach guy would have definitely been enemies. His friend replied that he didn't even want to think about it. Hannah called out to them with a smile, announcing that it was time for them to head home. A little later, the protagonist went over to Christina and asked if that crystal was really something special. After all, he had chosen it from all the loot after defeating the boss. She replied that in her world, the moon was called the Eye of God, which illuminates the darkness. When the moon glowed red, all the monsters on the Idea continent would fly into a rage, but when it glowed blue, they would become calm. Because of this, the moon crystal could be used in many different ways. "Remember that werewolf?" she asked. "You can gain powerful regeneration even stronger than a troll's." The protagonist realized that's why the regeneration was so quick this time. Castle chimed in that this meant they'd have to get hit twice as hard to die. The protagonist agreed, adding that victory was pretty easy this time. He was a decent foe, but how should they use the moon crystal? Christina suggested it would be best to use it as a core for one of them. The MC said they had to choose one of them. Castle declared that the choice was perfectly clear. Both skeletons insisted they should give it to Christina. Surprised, she asked, "Are you sure? Can I really have it?" Castle agreed, admitting that it was obvious he couldn't handle it. Kai gave him a playful shove, agreeing that it wasn't for him either. "That settles it then," the protagonist said. "The crystal will suit you perfectly." Christina thanked them, promising she would definitely live up to their expectations. She explained she would be busy installing the core for now, so she asked them to leave her alone for a while. With that, the skeleton scurried off and closed the door. The protagonist smiled, figuring they wouldn't be seeing her again for a bit. 3 days after Team Hanbok found the moon crystal, the Normals Guild began their scheduled exploration of the second floor, deep inside the dungeon. One of the adventurers commented that there was no end in sight. Hana reminded everyone that the second floor was much more dangerous than the first, so they needed to stay focused and protect each other. She stressed that their goal was to survive and return home. With that, they proceeded to descend to the dungeon's second floor. Hana spotted a light and shouted, "I see the exit! Just a little further!" She warned, "I don't know what's waiting for us, so hold the formation." As they reached the exit, they were greeted by the sight of a forest under a bright blue sky. They gasped in shock. "How is there a sky inside a dungeon?" one of the adventurers asked in disbelief. "Is that even possible?" At that exact moment, the protagonist received new information about the floor on his phone. Peering at the screen, Castle asked if it was for real that there was a forest in the dungeon. The protagonist replied that he didn't see any reason for the system to lie. Kai noted that dungeons higher than E-class sometimes had open spaces. He wondered if they should ask Christina about it. So they went to her room and showed her the floor information. The MC asked for her thoughts, and she simply replied that it was nothing special. She said things like this happened all the time on the Idea continent. He asked, "So this is possible in regular dungeons too?" The skeleton explained that there was a difference. The main thing is monsters in this type of space are twice as strong as usual. "Of course that won't be a problem for you," she added, "but it's clear now that this is a field-type dungeon. Unlike regular dungeons, it's a wide-open space with its own ecosystem." The protagonist asked, "So the entire dungeon is just one huge floor?" Castle exclaimed that he was correct. To put it simply, the floors are laid out horizontally next to each other, not stacked vertically like before. Handing the phone back, Christina confirmed that he was right. And since all the floors are connected, the scale of the territory is absolutely massive. Furthermore, there are no boss rooms in these areas. The MC's eyes widened. This means the bosses are just wandering around somewhere, not waiting for players. That was dangerous, unfamiliar terrain crawling with bosses. Christina pointed out that nothing had really changed. You just need to kill the bosses and clear the dungeon, that's all. There's nothing special about it. With that, she went back to her room. Once she left, Castle asked what their plan was. The protagonist replied with a smile, "We're doing the same thing we always do. Like Christina said, nothing's changed. I'm going to train. We need to be prepared for anything." The skeleton remarked that he was always so confident. "That confidence is what makes me sure we'll win," he added. Kai agreed, saying they wouldn't lose as he went back to his book. Castle announced that he was going to watch his Haunted House series. They fell back into their usual routines, and a few days later they devised a new plan and reached out to the Normals Guild. Hana got a message on her phone and announced that Himbok had contacted her. One of the warriors asked what he had to say. She replied that he wasn't asking them to team up, but was simply warning them about the dungeon. She'd received some kind of conditional offer. Sometime later, the protagonist's team joined them and all the adventurers started to prepare. Castle shouted, "Get them moving. We need to hurry, so get digging. You get me. If that wall falls, you'll be the first ones to die. If you don't want to become undead like me, then get to work." One of the adventurers muttered, "I get it, of course, but aren't they just using us for labor?" Another guy replied, "Well, we do need their protection." Castle called out to them furiously, asking, "What are you two standing around for? You don't seem desperate enough for people who want to stay among the living." The protagonist approached him and said calmly, "Thanks to the Normals Guild's help, the work is going much easier and faster." He popped in to check on the construction and top off his mana. Turns out mana recharges 3 times faster inside a dungeon. Hana spotted him and said his timing was perfect. Kai was there too, so our MC told him he was in charge and bounced. In exchange for their help building the shelter on the second floor, he offered to teach the Normals Guild some magic. They jumped at the chance, and now everything's going off without a hitch. Kai and Castle are running the show since they've got the skills and experience for the job. Castle's in charge of things inside the camp while Kai handles the perimeter. Makes sense since the skeleton used to be a knight. Knowing what was at stake, he'd already trained several scouts. Later, our protagonist found him and praised his excellent work, asking if he'd discovered anything new. Kai reported that on top of the great ape monster they already knew about, they'd also spotted red monkeys and rhinoceros beetles. The rhinoceros beetles are about the size of a human head and can fly. They've got a massive, sharp horn, which is obviously the part you want to avoid. Our protagonist asked if they were carnivores. The skeleton confirmed it, adding, "That's all they knew about the local monsters for now." Kai mentioned that their intel was still pretty thin. The MC told him that was fine and to keep him posted, but not to push his luck. Meanwhile, Castle was busy training the adventurers, shouting that their stances needed to be strong and confident, reminding them that their skills would never let them down. This went on for quite a while. Our MC reflected on how he kept teaching people magic, always remembering Christina's words, "A wizard must give as much as he receives." While teaching, he actually learned a few things himself that helped him strengthen his fourth magic circle. As people got more comfortable with the camp, many even started staying in the dungeon overnight to recharge their mana. Once night fell, one of the adventurers pointed up at a massive bone dragon in the sky, worrying that they'd all be toast if it decided to attack. But another guy just shrugged, saying Lord Hienbach was on their side. To him, that thing was probably just a glorified bug. The first guy admitted he was strong, sure, but still, the second adventurer just said they could handle it themselves. After all, that's what all this training was for. Our protagonist noted that more and more people were reporting sightings of all sorts of incredible creatures. Of course he wasn't out sightseeing. He just kept steadily stockpiling mana and practicing his magic. 80 days flew by like this. One day, Kai, along with Hana and another adventurer, came running back, shouting for everyone to run for their lives. It turned out they'd been attacked by a massive army of giant monkeys that had gathered together. The terrified adventurer couldn't believe it, exclaiming, "How could they have spotted us? We were so careful." Kai drew his sword, ordering them to get back and report everything to the master. A scout's duty comes first. He charged into battle, cutting down multiple enemies at once. The monkeys threw a furious volley of spears, but Kai deftly dodged every single one. But then another monster appeared out of nowhere and landed a devastating blow from behind, shattering his helmet. The skeleton went flying, crashing into a rock. The monkey lunged in for the kill, but at the last second, Hana jumped between them. She braced her shield and managed to block the attack. Just then, an adventurer on the sidelines signaled for her to fall back and fired a crossbow bolt, taking the monkey down. Kai got back on his feet and thanked them for the save. Hana suggested they team up to defend themselves. The adventurer just smiled, saying this is what he'd been training for. There was no way they were going to lose. Just then, the wounded monkey pulled the arrow out and furiously signaled for the others to attack, unleashing a whole horde of monsters on them. They started fighting back, firing crossbows and using their shields to bash the enemy. Meanwhile, Kai's expert swordsmanship allowed him to cut down 3 opponents at once, but then a massive fireball appeared in the sky. He yelled that they were under fire and to be careful. After dodging the blast, the skeleton wondered why the monkeys were attacking and moving so differently now. They'd managed to separate the party and were still pushing forward. But what was behind this sudden coordinated attack? He personally charged the lead monkey, unleashing a flurry of lightning-fast strikes. After that intense assault, the monster collapsed. Kai turned to check if everyone else was okay. The red monkey was down, but just then a colossal white monkey, the wandering boss, snuck up behind him. With a single swing, the monster immobilized the adventurers and wound up for another attack. Sword in hand, Kai thought, "Master, forgive me. You'll have to go on without me." But suddenly, the protagonist's voice echoed in his head, telling him to duck. The skeleton did as he was told, and the white monkey's fist flew right past him. Instead, it smashed into the 4th Circle Master Necromancer's monster, a massive stone golem. The golem retaliated with a powerful blow of its own, sending the monkey flying. The MC wondered aloud, has he forgotten? We always see things through to the end and never give up halfway. He was surprised to see the monster return. The white monkey sauntered up to the golem, a wide grin spreading across its face. Castle readied his weapon, shouting, "Be careful, we have no idea what it's going to do." Just then, the white monkey let out a deafening screech that stunned them. At that moment, a pack of blood wolves appeared, led by a monstrous 2-headed one. Seeing the protagonist was dazed, Christina sent him an urgent telepathic message. "Snap out of it! All these monsters are attacking us." She quickly used her heal skill to bring Hana around. The skeleton asked how she was feeling. The girl sat up, exclaiming in confusion, "What happened, Faye?" The MC stood beside her and apologized, saying he had put too much of a burden on her. He told her they needed to defeat the bosses so they could all return home safe and sound. Right on cue, the blood wolves launched their attack. The golem swung at one of the wolves, but the creature instantly dissolved into a bloody mass that wrapped around the golem. Castle, facing off against several more wolves, scoffed at them as fools. He boasted that he could make quick work of such small fry. He slashed at one of the monsters, but instead of dying, it also dissolved into a thick, sludgy mass. The skeleton exclaimed that they were just like slimes. At that moment, the white gorilla started hurling massive rocks at them. The protagonist yelled for Castle to fall back. The white gorilla, thinking the golem was trapped in the bloody sludge, leaped in to attack. Suddenly, the MC conjured sharp-boned spikes from the ground, followed by a massive earth golem that immediately knocked the white gorilla off its feet. Castle was floored, exclaiming, "He can summon something that huge with just the golem's heart." The MC noted that his mana was already running low. He only had enough for about 20 minutes. Castle replied that would be more than enough time. Just then, Hana called out, warning him to watch his step as something approached them from below. All of a sudden, blood wolves began sprouting from the earth golem's body. The protagonist realized the splattered remains of the other wolves were reforming. They had to defend themselves, and fast. Christina declared she would show them the power of her core. She summoned enraged magi skeletons, which also began clawing their way out of the earth golem. The protagonist was shocked, exclaiming that she wasn't a necromancer, yet she could summon mages. He realized this must be the power of the moonstone. He put Kai in command of the skeletons, and the skeleton confidently replied, "You can count on me. We'll have the skeletons repel their attacks." The undead army immediately charged forward, unleashing a barrage of magic and steel. And just like that, they began to systematically take down the blood wolves. Seeing its minions fall, the enraged white gorilla ripped a massive boulder from the ground and hurled it at them, only for the earth golem to step in and shatter it. Suddenly, the two-headed blood wolf leaped high into the air, unleashing a powerful breath attack directly down on the party. The MC quickly activated his bone prison skill, but the attack was so powerful it still sent them all flying. "Skeletons, cover them," he yelled as Christina and Castle scrambled to catch the other adventurers. Amidst the chaos, the protagonist summoned his bone dragon Nidhogg. The two-headed blood wolf immediately fired another breath attack, this time aimed squarely at the newly summoned dragon. Nidhogg was furious, telepathically roaring about how dare this mongrel imitate a dragon's power. The protagonist quickly shouted, "Nidhogg, wait! This isn't an ordinary monster. You can't just waste your breath attack." But the bone dragon ignored him, firing its own magical breath to counter the wolf's. The two powers clashed in a massive explosion that sent Nidhogg staggering back. The MC saw that Nidhogg was being pushed back, but he knew that if he intervened, his mana would be gone in an instant. They had to break off the attack. Nidhogg, however, roared telepathically, "Silence, human. I am a dragon I do not know defeat." He found himself agreeing with the dragon's pride. He couldn't believe this monster was actually overpowering Nidhogg. The protagonist raised his staff, realizing there was no other choice. "I'm transferring all of my mana to you," he declared. "Show them the true might of a dragon." Fueled by the power, Nidhogg used his vicious breath skill, unleashing an attack that completely obliterated the two-headed blood wolf. Having poured every last drop of his mana into the attack, the MC collapsed to the ground. Moments later, his skeletons rushed to his side, frantically calling for him to open his eyes. They carefully carried his unconscious body home and laid him in his bed. Sometime later, he finally woke up. Castle, overjoyed, exclaimed, "He's awake. Hey, you recognize us, right?" Kai gently asked how he was feeling, while a tearful Christina confessed how worried she had been. Still groggy, the protagonist asked what happened. Kai explained that he'd suffered from severe mana exhaustion and needed to rest. Castle chimed in, ordering him not to even think about getting out of bed. He pushed himself up slightly, asking how Hana and her guild members were doing. Kai assured him that everyone made it out safely, thanks to his efforts, and had already returned home. The MC let out a sigh of relief. "That's good to hear." He had pushed himself to the limit, spending every last drop of mana instead of playing it safe. He knew something much worse could have happened. The skeleton boasted that they only beat those bosses thanks to him. Without his mana, they would have been completely useless. Christina agreed, adding that the monsters were getting more and more aggressive, so they needed to take care of them as quickly as possible. Our MC knew that was true, but there was another problem. Nidhogg's pride had just landed them in a very dangerous situation. Kai said they had the situation figured out, but there was still one more thing. Thanks to some scouting with Master Hannah, they discovered a new monster, a giant. It's a low-class monster, a little bigger than that white monkey. They were calling it a lesser giant. Castle figured that if it was low class, it shouldn't be much of a problem. Kai pointed out that it was a big mistake to think the battle would be easy. It might be the weakest of the giants, but it was still much stronger than the trolls. It was a danger to him and the lady because of its magic immunity, and on top of that, they were extremely intelligent. He figured it would be the most dangerous monster they'd ever fought. Suddenly, a magic portal opened up overhead and Nidhogg announced that he was interested. He declared he would kill it himself and they should just stand back and watch, warning them not to interfere like last time. He told them not to waste his time, as he could figure this out on his own. Castle exclaimed angrily that they might be sworn enemies, but how dare he act like this? Christina added that Nidhogg's disrespectful behavior couldn't be ignored. She said our MC should discipline him. The protagonist agreed, but said it was better to get some rest for now. Meanwhile, Gloria crossed out a portrait of the two-headed blood wolf, wondering why she'd even wasted her time on it. She hadn't thought they'd be defeated so easily. How boring. It seemed a small country like Korea had plenty of worthy opponents. They had dealt with her creatures far too quickly. Even 20 of them wasn't enough. It was time for her to really begin. She spun a roulette wheel and watched as the result came in. The wheel landed right on the protagonist's portrait. Gloria smiled, saying she'd been saving him for dessert. Oh well, it looked like they'd have to start their meal with something sweet. Sometime after the battle, everyone began preparing to fight the giant while the protagonist was busy extracting the monster core. Hana approached him and said in surprise, "So that's what a goblin's heart looks like." He replied that it drains mana from the surrounding area and is useful for summoning golems, though the usage time varies depending on the type of golem. She mentioned they'd tried many times to find a proper use for it, but now everything finally made sense. Our MC handed her the core, and seeing her strange expression asked if she had something to tell him. The girl replied that the Normals Guild wanted to discuss their contract. The thing is, any battle with him ends in victory, but without him, they'd probably never succeed. They were completely convinced of this after the last battle. Even though they tried their best with training, and reconnaissance opponents of this level were simply invincible to them. She admitted that she didn't think they could defeat any of these bosses even altogether. She saw how powerful a mage he was, and because of that, she had made her choice. The normals would not be completing this dungeon. This undertaking would end in nothing but pointless sacrifices. They needed to get stronger to survive in a place like this. Hana bowed her head and exclaimed that she was asking for his forgiveness. She begged him to forgive her for ending their contract like this. Our MC replied that he understood and told her to raise her head. He knew it must have been a difficult decision for her. He agreed to terminate the contract on the spot, but of course they could keep using everything they had built. Shocked, Hana asked if he really meant that. He agreed, remarking that they had built it all together anyway. He wished them all good luck. The girl shook his hand and thanked him. And so after working together for a short time, their paths diverged. Everyone had different goals and means of achieving them, but they were all united by the simple desire to survive. They simply approached it in different ways. After this event, a system window appeared, stating that 273 days remained until the quest failed. Hanbok had begun exploring the dungeon 227 days ago. This was the day he parted ways with the Normals Guild. Sometime later, the protagonist and his skeleton squad approached the giant's dungeon. Castle noted with surprise that it was a dungeon within a dungeon, while Kai advised them to be quieter, so as not to wake the monster. Near the sleeping boss, several weaker monsters were milling about. Nidhogg announced that they needed to move in right away. Our MC asked if he was planning to fight it alone. Nidhogg replied that it was just a low-class giant, and they would only get in the way. Castle shot back angrily, "We'll get in the way." The protagonist just sighed and told him to get ready. Nidhogg then appeared right next to the monsters, waking the boss. He immediately began to fight them, furiously fending off the smaller monsters with his tail. The giant tried to strike, but the dragon bit its arm and threw it aside. Castle exclaimed in surprise, "Has he lost his mind? This is too much." Nidhogg just told them to stay out of his way, insisting he could handle it alone. This giant dared to look down on him. In response, the boss charged forward, landing a mighty blow that sent the dragon flying backward. He furiously unleashed his magical breath, roaring, "Just die." Unfazed, the giant calmly walked through the attack and struck him in the head. Christina cried out that they needed to intervene. Castle began attacking the smaller monsters, agreeing that it was their turn now. At that moment, the giant started to mercilessly pummel the dragon. Nidhogg furiously scrambled to his feet, exclaiming that a wimp like him could never defeat him. In response, the giant delivered a powerful kick and smirked, calling him a weakling. The bone dragon angrily declared that he was a dragon, a member of the greatest race, and that he couldn't possibly lose to someone like him. The protagonist asked, "Do you get it now? You're not a real dragon, just a cheap imitation." Nidhogg angrily retorted, "Shut up. That's not true." The giant called him a weakling again and unleashed a barrage of blows. MC shouted that he already knew the truth. He needed to stop fooling himself and swallow his pride. He can't become a true dragon just by wishing for it. The beatdown escalated until the giant ripped off several of his bones once again, calling him weak. Lying on the ground, Nidhogg cried out that Hinbok had made him a promise. He had promised to make him stronger than a true dragon, but look at him now, he'd lost. He couldn't keep his promise. He had lied. The protagonist replied that while a promise was made, Nidhogg hadn't fulfilled his part of the bargain either. He explained he couldn't continue on his path with a creature whose mind was so clouded by pride. He was truly his strongest card, but that was in the past. If he continued to think only of himself, he would never be able to grow stronger. Meanwhile, the other skeletons continued their battle with the smaller monsters. Thanks to their excellent teamwork, they quickly dispatched each opponent. Observing this, Nidhogg said that it was all clear to him now. While the others trained and improved, he had done nothing. So he asked to be taught. He wanted more power. MC smiled, saying those were the words he had been waiting for. He poured his mana into the bone dragon, causing him to form a new body and rise to his feet. The protagonist then exclaimed, "Let's attack! We need to get rid of him." He then used the skills Ghost Armor, Negative Energy, and Unholy Weapon, greatly empowering the dragon. The protagonist remarked that this was the kind of magic Nidhogg should be using himself. Learn it now, and you'll become much stronger. Nidhogg replied that he would keep that in mind. He smiled in surprise and exclaimed that it was time for them to finish the enemy. With those words, the bone dragon charged forward. He soared into the air, knocking the giant back before using the skill bone spear of death. Shards of bone shot out from his wings, and one of them pinned the monster to the ground. Seeing this, Nidhogg declared this was the end. Instantly, the bone shards detonated, creating one massive explosion. Watching the spectacle, Castle remarked that Nidhogg finally looked like a real dragon. Suddenly, he spotted a silhouette and shouted, "Be careful!" The giant's body, now shrouded in a magical barrier, fell from the sky directly onto Nidhogg, sending them both crashing to the ground. The skeletons rushed over, exclaiming in confusion when they saw the giant. They'd already killed him, so how was this possible? MC got to his feet and warned everyone to be careful, saying he didn't like this atmosphere. He felt like someone was nearby watching them. Suddenly, a woman named Gloria appeared behind them, clapping and acknowledging his victory. However, she added that the battle had disappointed her. So maybe we should start over. The protagonist sensed an incredible power from her and used telepathy to warn his skeletons not to move. "We can't provoke her," the girl asked, perplexed. "Are you really going to do nothing, not even ask me anything about..." He asked if she would even answer his questions. She smiled and said she wouldn't. "What's the point then?" MC asked. "If you're the only one who gets what you want." Gloria chuckled, remarking that she was beginning to understand what kind of person he was. He was right, only the strong have the right to choose. She admitted that while she had planned on killing him, she would spare his life now. She liked his confidence, and while he didn't fully grasp the situation, she despised those who lacked insight. The protagonist wondered if she was talking about Nidhogg. Gloria then asked aloud, "Now what should I do? Since I'm already here, it would be boring to just leave." She snapped her fingers and in an instant healed them all completely. The protagonist was baffled, realizing his body felt as if it had been fully restored. He could feel his mana overflowing. Gloria asked, "Well, has everyone recovered?" She then flew into the air and announced it was time to fight. He asked, "Am I supposed to fight you?" The girl smiled and agreed, saying, "Don't worry, I'll hold back. Just focus on surviving. I'll give you 5 minutes. You just have to last that long." Using telepathy, Christina noted that something was off. It felt like her words and her actions weren't lining up. Maybe this was some kind of test. Our MC replied that they didn't have much of a choice. They would have to do as she said. If push came to shove, he'd transfer all his mana to Nidhogg for one big attack. Castle and Kai would stay protected. Gloria, with a wild grin, exclaimed, "Stop wasting time." She'd even concede the first move. "Let's begin," she said. The protagonist signaled the dragon to attack, and Nidhogg instantly began charging his magical breath. He gave the signal for Christina to transfer all her mana to him. The skeleton complied, donating her mana and allowing the dragon to use the vicious breath skill. Gloria instantly enlarged her arm and asked, "Is that all you've got?" "This is too boring." She easily parried the attack and counterattacked in the same motion, causing Nidhogg to crumble into pieces. The MC was shocked, wondering how she could do that to the dragon with just one hand. The girl mockingly asked if she should just change her mind and kill him instead. Castle, horrified, cried out that it was impossible. Who was this woman? She was like a creature from another world. How could they possibly fight her in a place like this? He remembered what she'd said about coming from somewhere else and shouted that he was counting on Nidhogg. The protagonist poured his mana into the dragon and directed him to capture the giant. The dragon immediately flew toward the sphere containing the monster. He shouted that he needed a magical explosion. Christina heard him and helped him create the powerful magic explosion skill. After an attack that powerful, the protective dome shattered and the giant began to revive. Our hero exclaimed that they needed to destroy the shield before the process was complete. Castle grabbed his sword and replied, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." He instantly lunged forward and stabbed the dome, causing it to crack even more. At that moment, Kai infused his weapon with mana and hurled it straight at the giant, causing the dome to break completely. The protagonist considered this, thinking, "Just as I thought." Gloria chuckled and asked if he really just spent all his energy on a lesser giant, especially when he was planning to defeat her. He replied that he was certain a powerful being like her couldn't have come to this world on her own. She obviously needed a guide. "That's why you were shielding the dying giant, right?" The girl smiled and remarked that he really was different. The fact that they'd come all this way with that knowledge pleased her. They had passed her test. She would let them live. "At least you gave me a good laugh," she said. "I'll even give you a reward. I won't take him." Our MC asked what that meant. Gloria replied that she would make him her apprentice or servant. It was time for her to go, so she was leaving. He had earned himself a bonus. The girl introduced herself, adding that she was a demon dragon of misfortune. The darkness itself had blessed her. She offered to play again sometime. He was, after all, her future apprentice or servant. After that, Gloria disappeared completely. A system window appeared stating that 258 days remained until the quest failed. Habak had begun exploring the dungeon 242 days ago. The current battle had ended in victory. Sometime later, they returned home. The protagonist sighed and remarked that she seemed dead set on taking him with her. Christina said that things were looking bad for them. She could put her plans into action the next time they met. He began to think that there were some truly incredible creatures in this dungeon. Perhaps there were even beings far more powerful than this Gloria. It was entirely possible that whoever had invaded Idea the planet where Christina once lived were now operating on Earth. It seemed they wanted to either eliminate potentially dangerous people or make them their servants. Castle asked what he was going to do. Our MC asked, "What do you all think?" He replied that they had to fight. She was their enemy. Any longer and they would have lost, but fighting her now would be like signing a death wish. They cared about him and they were already dead. Out of all of them, he was the only one still truly alive. They wanted to fight her, but it was too dangerous for him. "And even if you did agree to go with her, we want to be with you until the very end," he said. Kai added that he felt the same way. Whoever he chose as his ally, a god, a devil, or something worse, he like a knight would follow his master to the end. No matter what that path might be, Christina agreed with them. The protagonist asked if she was really willing to fight side by side with her own enemy. She replied that, as she had said before, her goals were much loftier than that. She truly wanted revenge, but if she failed, she was still confident that they would achieve much more together. The protagonist said he understood. What did Nidhogg think about this? The dragon replied that his only goal was to become stronger. Therefore, he didn't care who helped him do it. Castle exclaimed in displeasure. "What is this nonsense? Am I the only one who thinks differently? I may know." And what did he think about all this? Our MC replied that he didn't know. When your life is on the line, it's hard to make the right choice. But he was sure that siding with her would never bring them peace. Castle inquired further. So he wanted to fight. He agreed and added that he was not her student. This was just a warning. They had a choice, run away or fight. He thought they needed to become stronger to be on the same level with her. The skeleton exclaimed that he was a real man. He was ready to fight such a dangerous opponent. He would definitely help him. Christina noted that Gloria was unlike everyone else. She was ready to stand by him to the end, but if their lives were constantly threatened by their numerous escapes, she might betray him. MC thought that, in other words, if she realized their strength was unequal, she too would become his enemy. Well, even on a day like this, he had to force them to serve him to the end. He would have to use force. They had come such a long way trusting each other. He had to do everything possible not to lose that trust. Suddenly the doorbell rang. The protagonist, surprised, asked if it was their doorbell that had just gone off. Christina replied that the door was probably now connected to the outside world since they had won the last battle. He wondered if they had already contacted the outside world. But who had come to see them, he wasn't expecting guests. After that, the MC approached the door and, looking at the video camera, asked who it was. Kang Hai, who ran the operations bureau, showed her badge and introduced herself. then asked if they could talk. He looked at the bustling skeletons and told them to calm down. It was someone from the dungeon website. Of course, regular people wouldn't come to them. They all, including Nidhogg, exclaimed in shock that there was a real company behind the dungeons. The protagonist asked why they needed him. A little earlier, the manager angrily slammed the table and exclaimed, "How is this possible? Where did such monsters come from in an E-class dungeon? They've already lost 16. The employee replied that there were survivors too. For example, a young man with talent who could take on a class. His name is Hunbach. He'll send an agent to check the dungeons where people died. The manager said they'd better first contact the promising researcher he mentioned. Have him contact Hunbach right now." He entered the house, and bowing her head thanked them before introducing herself again. MC bowed his head and introduced himself in return. He remarked that he hadn't known there was anyone behind the dungeon website. The girl replied that they manage the website and ship items using the technology of higher beings. They also help researchers with money circulation. Christina asked which higher beings. Their organization can contact them whenever they want. Ha, shocked, thought it was nothing, even if it was a skeleton. She was at work after all. She smiled and replied that she didn't know all the details, but they thought they were both gods and demons. MC asked why she came to him. The girl replied that she would tell him straight out. They can view player information through the dungeon app, and they especially closely monitor explorers with A-class talents. They suddenly discovered that 16 people had died in an E-class dungeon. The protagonist remarked that this meant they found him to get information. Ha agreed, and added that they really needed to know what was going on in Dungeon E. But they would also like to offer him a partnership. He asked what they could give him. Any information cost money, and to their knowledge, he already had plenty of money. The girl replied that if he agreed to share the information, they would sell him mana crystals. They constantly monitor new listings on the website, so they possess very rare crystals. The protagonist wondered what they should do. Crystals would open up a multitude of new possibilities. Christina, using telepathy, noted that they probably had something else that wasn't on the dungeon website. They needed to find out. He said that wasn't enough. Could she offer anything else? Jaime asked if he was so confident in the value of his information. The MC replied with a smile that he could stake his life on it. Suddenly her phone rang. The girl apologized, stepped away, and answered the call, then remarked that they were having a slight problem. A moment later, she handed him the phone and said it was the director. He wanted to speak with him personally. The protagonist took the phone and said hello. The director greeted him, introduced himself, and said they were willing to sell him medicinal herbs and metals cheaply. Mana, crystals, of course. He replied that he would agree if there was a 50% discount. The guy remarked that he couldn't go below 90% of the cost price. The protagonist, smiling, said he was offering 55%. The manager nervously said 85% at most, that more would be impossible. He counted that he wanted 60%, so they settled on 75%. MC agreed and noted that their contract would be for 3 years. The manager nervously exclaimed that 3 years was too long. Does he even understand that a 25% discount is worth a lot? He replied that he promised him that he wouldn't leave the country for those 3 years. The director exclaimed, "What is this nonsense?" The protagonist explained that one day researchers would clear all the dungeons. Wouldn't he want to recruit them for his organization? That's why he needs intel on the researchers, and our guy is a prime candidate. If he doesn't agree, it's no big deal. He can just find a better offer in another country. The manager nervously agreed, adding that he'd be willing to work for the government for those 3 years. He flatly refused. The director angrily demanded to know why. The MC simply stated that he had no desire to work for the government. There would always be strings and red tape attached. He had no intention of following anyone else's orders. The director said he understood. In that case, the contract would be for 2 years, and he'd cede up to 70% if he worked for them as a freelancer. The protagonist inquired, "So does that make me an employee? Are there any conditions?" The director agreed, warning that this was a one-time offer. The protagonist replied, "Then explain the details." He added that he wouldn't agree to perform any ridiculous tasks. The director grumpily consented, wondering if the kid was really that naive. He wasn't sure how long their partnership would last. The MC said they could draw up a contract then, and he'd send the terms through Jaime. Kai exclaimed that he'd handled that perfectly. Christina added happily that now they'd be getting a lot of useful items. Castle added that the items would definitely help them. The leader then warned him that they would require a test. They were a government organization after all. He had a lot of pull, but other agencies would raise hell if he personally signed the contract. He knew the MC's skills were top-notch, but if his team showed any sign of weakness, other organizations might try to usurp his position and take control of the researchers. The protagonist mulled it over. Was he implying that regular people could control researchers? He didn't like the sound of that, especially after what happened with Gloria. He needed to think this through. He asked what he needed to do. The leader replied that he would have to clear a dungeon. To be precise, it's a sealed dungeon that other researchers have failed to clear in the past. These types of dungeons are connected to our world. They're sealed to prevent monsters from spilling out. The protagonist realized this meant monsters were appearing in the real world too, so that's why they were so eager to hire researchers like him. The leader noted that while the dungeon was rated F rank, it was much harder than a typical one. He then asked if he would agree to the test. Using telepathy, the MC asked his team, "What do you guys think? Should we take the test and sign the contract?" Kai replied that he didn't see the point in arguing. It would only make things more difficult for everyone. Castle agreed, adding that he didn't care if they were basically mercenaries, but having connections with the top brass would be useful. Christina pointed out that they needed to get stronger anyway, and they had more pressing problems to deal with. The protagonist agreed to the test. He then requested information about the dungeon. They soon arrived at the location where Colonel Kim Juni was waiting for them. The helicopter landed and Hanbok and his team emerged along with Kang Hamey. The colonel asked her if that was him. She confirmed, introducing him as their dungeon clearing assistant researcher, Kim Hanbok. Kim Juni frowned, saying he highly doubted this guy could handle monsters of this level. The MC decided to just keep his mouth shut. Jaime insisted that even though he looked like an ordinary person, he had already successfully cleared several dungeons and they had confirmation from the top brass. The colonel retorted that he was the one in charge of personnel selection here. They couldn't just appoint anyone. She stated firmly that her authority came directly from the chief of staff, and disobedience would be a violation of military law. The colonel fell silent, knowing she was right. After which he returned to his soldiers and told them that if Hanbok's team retreated, they were not to take any responsibility for them. Castle muttered irritably, "That guy is so pompous. Why the hell is he stopping us from just entering the dungeon? What kind of test is this anyway?" Kai calmly told him to just think of it as a welcoming ceremony. Castle just exclaimed that Kai was being way too generous. With that settled, they proceeded deeper into the military base. The soldiers started mocking them, saying they looked like a bunch of cosplayers in masks and superhero costumes. The team didn't react at all, though Castle let out a heavy sigh. The colonel led them to a massive warehouse and told them to wait there. He then ordered a soldier to open the doors. As they slid open, they revealed the ruins of a house with a large gate inside. Just as the gate began to open and monsters emerged, Kim Juni told Hanbok he could proceed. A whole squad of armed goblins spilled out, and upon seeing the humans, they immediately charged into battle. The colonel ordered his soldiers to block the entrance and eliminate them. However, for some reason, the warehouse door jammed. He ordered the entire squad to move in, yelling that they couldn't let a single one escape. The soldiers swarmed the warehouse entrance and began firing on the monsters and model, preventing them from escaping when a goblin mage showed up. It cast a fire spell to scatter the soldiers, hitting a few of them and setting their clothes ablaze. Seeing this, the colonel ordered the other soldiers to call for medics. But for some reason, the flames started to move and converge in one spot. This was Hanbok's doing. He called for Nidhogg, and a cloud of darkness materialized behind him from which the dragon poked its head out. The colonel definitely did not see that coming. Our MC commanded him to kill them, and Nidhogg slammed the goblins with his massive paw, sending debris flying everywhere. Some of the debris hit the door, but the barrier protected it from being destroyed. The colonel was stunned by the sight, and Hanbok informed him that he was heading inside. After 30 hours, the test was successfully completed. When he remembers how hard it was to clear F-rank dungeons, he realizes just how much they've grown. After that, he signed a contract with the dungeon company and shared the information about Gloria. The leader immediately grew nervous. He didn't think they could possibly solve this problem on their own. The entire world would need to join forces. He asked his subordinate to secretly send this information to a neighboring state to prevent any leaks. Then he handed him a note and asked him to deliver it to the right person. The subordinate quietly went to carry out his tasks. Meanwhile, Christina was busy inspecting the goods. Our MC approached her and asked if there was anything good on the company's inventory list. She mentioned they had low and mid-level crystals and mana alloys. There was definitely some good stuff to buy. He asked if it was all too expensive. Even with a 30% discount, he didn't want to pay more than $25 million. She told him that, according to her information, those prices were set by higher beings. He asked how much she'd want to buy, and with her eyes shining in delight, she said that if it were possible, she'd buy everything. She was dying to use it all together. Heenbach exclaimed that they absolutely shouldn't do that. Even if they had the money, they couldn't afford to spend that much. Just then a loud crash echoed from upstairs. Something hit the ceiling hard and debris came crashing down to the floor. Right after, a hole appeared where the impact was, and Castle's guilty voice could be heard from above. He peeked through the hole and apologized to his master, explaining that he was just looking for a spot for the magic circle, just like he'd asked. He wasn't planning on putting a magic circle downstairs, was he? Why would they need holes in the floor? The MC let out a nervous laugh and just asked him to be careful. During their break, they weren't just busy with the dungeon company's test. They had also moved into a new base of operations. The first floor is the lobby. The second floor is Christina's lab, and the third floor is his lab along with training areas for Nidhogg, Kai, and Castle. It's officially their new fortress. The entrance to the building and the lobby will still be connected to the dungeon. So for protection, Christina decided to inscribe magic circles all over the building. These magic circles will also allow them to gather data on what's happening inside the dungeons. Over time, they'll be able to find the answers to all their questions. Meanwhile, Kai was setting up magic circles with Nidhogg. He demonstrated how to create a magic circle with a sword, and Nidhogg decided to copy him. He drew a magic circle with his own claw, and Kai praised him for it, noting that he didn't even need a sword. The dragon was thrilled with the compliment. Meanwhile, Hayami showed up to see Heenbach, commenting on their very nice new place. He was surprised and asked why she hadn't given him a heads up about her visit. After all, today was supposed to be his last day off, which she'd said he could spend however he wanted. She told him that's exactly why she was here. He was already aware that the door would soon be connected to the dungeon. He didn't quite get what she was talking about. She explained that while they don't normally choose dungeons for players, they already knew which one he would be assigned. There would be 35 other explorers in this dungeon, all chosen by their company. They would all be exploring the D-rank dungeon, the Cave of Doubt, together. He immediately refused, saying he wasn't nearly strong enough to protect 35 people in a D-rank dungeon. If she sent him with them, the others would think the central office didn't trust them, which would almost certainly lead to conflict. She gave an awkward smile and said she understood completely. In that case, she would simply ask him to gather information on the dungeon. Would he be able to handle that request? He agreed, and she handed him a flash drive with files detailing the system's reorganization. Now there would be additional quests on top of the general ones. Also, completing quests would now earn him community points. She said it would be best for him to review the files himself. Our MC pointed out that she could have just emailed the files instead of coming all this way, but she replied that she prefers meeting people in person. After that, she bowed and wished him the best of luck with his dungeon exploration. He said his goodbyes, telling her they'd see each other again if he made it out alive. After that, the whole group headed into the dungeon together. While checking his phone, he noticed that dungeons from D class and up actually have names. Christina mentioned there were only 300 explorers asking, "We'll be okay, right?" He just told her they'd find out soon enough. And Castle immediately commented that he wasn't a fan of the name. What if it made the explorers start suspecting each other? Hanbach paused for a second, figuring that must be why they called it the Cave of Doubts. Immediately after, he bonked his head on a stalactite he didn't see in the dark. The skeletons worriedly called out to him. Clutching his head, he asked Kai to light the way, since it was pitch black. Castle pointed out that seeing in the dark was no problem for the undead. Maybe this was a good chance for him to practice his night vision skill. He did want to learn something new, right? The MC agreed that it was super dark, so it couldn't hurt to try. But what did he need to do? Castle crouched down a bit and explained that it wasn't hard at all. He just needed to get a little lower to the ground and carefully sense the movement of the air. The humidity would make it a little tricky, but he'd get the hang of it with some practice. He could also use magic to compensate for his lack of sight. Following the instructions, he began to concentrate. His mana started spreading throughout the dungeon, rippling outwards as it touched the walls. He could now sense everything his mana touched. Deciding to sharpen his focus, he increased his mana output. But for some reason, the first thing he saw was an angry Christina in front of him. She was staring furiously at her phone, shouting that everyone at the company was a bunch of liars. He eagerly asked what was wrong, and she shoved the phone in his face, exclaiming that they could buy 24 hours of freedom with community points, but it was limited to only 30 people per month. If they had been warned ahead of time, they could have saved up points to buy a ticket, but now everything was completely sold out. Hanbach told her to calm down, saying they'd just buy the tickets next time, and she agreed. With their remaining points, they could buy materials to upgrade their own cores. They'd also need some for Nidhogg, so they had to prepare everything in advance. The MC asked what she had in mind for Nidhogg. Christina explained that after analyzing his body, she found his bones were held together purely by magic, not by a core like the rest of them. He's missing the organ that's supposed to close and control his mana circuit. Nidhogg peeked out from the haze, asking what that meant. She explained that simply put, he didn't have a dragon's heart. To become a true dragon, he needed the right kind of magic, which meant he needed a core. He asked her to make one for him, but she warned that a core had its downsides. Right now, his body was just a vessel for his soul. So even if his body were destroyed, his soul would survive. But if the core was destroyed, he would die permanently. She could imitate a dragon's heart, but it would never surpass the real thing. He told her he didn't care, since he was already a fake to begin with. If a core would let him get even a little closer to the power of a true dragon, then he was all for it. Hanbok smiled, thinking to himself that Nidhogg had really changed after meeting Gloria. He seemed desperate to become a real dragon, so Hanbok decided to respect his wishes. Seeing his determination, Christina told Nidhogg there was something else he should know. In simple terms, a dragon's heart is just a large mana crystal. What makes it so special is the fact that it belongs to a dragon. The power comes from the dragon itself. Nidhogg replied that he understood and would remember that. Castle remarked that Nidhogg was now truly one of them, then turned to Kai for confirmation, asking, "Right." But when he saw Kai was nowhere to be found, he started frantically scanning the area for him. He was already fearing the worst, wondering if Kai had been attacked or captured. Just then Kai's voice came from behind him, asking, "Looking for me?" Castle was so startled he fell over, scrambling away while yelling that Kai had scared him. He asked where he'd been. He replied that they'd been chatting for so long that he'd decided to take a look around. The MC asked if he'd found anything. Kai replied that he'd found signs of an ambush, prompting the MC to ask if it was like that time at the E-rank dungeon entrance. Kai replied that this ambush was far more sophisticated. It looked like the monsters were waging a guerrilla war against the explorers. Hanbok was surprised. Blood splatters covered the cave walls leading towards a light that marked the exit. There on an island in the middle of a vast abyss stood the explorer's base. And at that very moment, two men were at each other's throats. Kim Jinho, the guildmaster of Strong Jun, was furious, demanding to know what they were even thinking. The other man was Kim Dahan, guildmaster of the Dahan Guild, which operated under the central office. Kim Dahan irritably told him to shut up, insisting it wasn't their fault they were attacked, but Jinho shot back indignantly that they were the ones who lured the monsters in the first place. Just then Park Jen, the guildmaster of Tamar, ran over with a few others and told them to stop fighting. Model. They couldn't afford to fight amongst themselves. They had bigger problems. So Jin Wan, the Heosu guildmaster, followed him, dragging an injured man along. Jukin added that while he wasn't certain, he had a gut feeling some intelligent monster was manipulating them into fighting each other. At that very moment, two women launched an attack on them from above. Chang, the survivors' guildmaster, declared that this vile troll had finally fallen into her grasp. This time, he wouldn't get away. She leaped onto the troll and unleashed a flurry of blows, sending him crashing to the ground. Jokin yelled indignantly, "What do you think you're doing? That's our monster. He's under our control. You can't do anything without my say-so." She stared at him in confusion, retorting that the monster had attacked her guild. Jinho grew anxious, thinking, "Is this really how it's going down? If so, we're totally screwed. All the guild masters are here in one place like sitting ducks." Suddenly, the ground began to shake. Dahan immediately shouted for his deputy Lee Siori, who scrambled up the watchtower. From her vantage point, she scanned the area, and the color drained from her face. She waved her arms frantically, signaling them to prepare for battle. A massive horde of monsters was swarming their base from all directions. As soon as they got close, the defenders began hacking away at the slime-covered skeletons. But this was a mistake. Their weapons started to melt, and anyone splattered with the slime felt an agonizing burning sensation. Dahan immediately realized the slime's blood was acidic and shouted a warning to the others, telling them not to cut the creatures, but to burn them instead. Jinwan grinned, boasting that his guild could take care of this in no time. He and his subordinates grabbed barrels of fuel-strapped dynamite to them and heaved them into the monster horde. As soon as the timers hit 0, the barrels erupted in a fiery explosion. Several buildings couldn't handle the shock wave and began to collapse, sending people scattering to avoid being crushed by the rubble. Someone summoned the spirit of Nos, which blanketed the area in an icy fog, dousing the flames and freezing the falling debris in midair, saving everyone from harm. Mong climbed onto Nos' shoulder and yelled for them to quit staring and keep attacking, shouting for them to burn every last one of the monsters. Jinwan and his guildmate were already on it, yelling back that they were way ahead of him. The plan was to herd all the monsters into one spot. Jokan commanded his own monsters to help round them up, and they immediately got to work. The troll began smashing its club on the ground to keep the slimes contained, while the wolf herded them forward from behind. The monsters were funneled into a narrow alley where a pair of swordsmen were already lying in wait. By this time, Jinwan's preparations were complete. He gave the signal and his team dropped the barrels. Several more explosions rocked the area. Sori watched in amazement, thinking they were incredibly effective. She knew she could learn a lot from them. A roar erupted behind her, and she whipped around to see humanoid monsters riding on lizards charging out of a cave. Dahan grew pale, wondering if the enemy's strategy was to destroy their weapons with the first assault. If so, how could they possibly continue the fight? Miang shouted to her guild members, ordering them to channel all their mana to Nos. Once the